Okay, it's go time. So, all right, hi everyone. So how many of you in like the past 3 months got an email that said, complete this survey and get a $5 Starbucks gift card, right? And then how many of you probably deleted that nonsense, right? I'm totally with you. I get it. And so we're gonna talk about today how to fight that kind of thing and have really interesting surveys that people want to do. So a little bit about me. My name is Rebecca Carter, and I am a scientist at Ohio State University. I work for the Heart and Lung Research Institute and the Catalyst Center for Team Science. And so I've just accepted an amazing dream job out here. And so I put out a little disclaimer just so I don't ruffle the feathers of my current or former overlords. Now, I specialize in 3 different areas of research in cardiovascular medicine. The one is data fusion, where I'm integrating and bringing in all sorts of different unstructured and unstructured data of all different types to build a complete picture of health. I'm also really interested in meeting the patient where they are and learning from their directly reported experiences through computational linguistic techniques. What we're talking about today is the third part of my work, which is understanding and public opinion about and misconceptions about critical health issues from the anonymous online crowd. And so one thing I've learned from crowdsourcing is, yes? I know. That's what happens. Better? A little bit less rumbly. Otherwise it would sound like thunder in the background. So where I was, way back in the ancient days, right, when Pluto was demoted as a planet and Daniel Craig became James Bond, I was doing clinical research. I was doing survey-based clinical research with teenagers that were addicted to illicit substances. And for the most part, they were not as deeply invested as we were in the study's importance and identifying factors that reduce the chance of relapse post-court-referred rehab. And so this particular population, their addresses changed often. They would lose their cell phones like toothpicks. But through really heavy recruitment and strong rapport building with this audience, we were able to retain 84% of those 84% of those hundreds of teenagers over a 5-year period. And so I translate those kind of skills over to deploying to the online crowd. And this is an area of epidemiological crowdsourcing, right? So to deploy anything for the internet that meets the scrutiny of scientific review, you need a carefully constructed and thoroughly tested approach. And so we're going to carry that attitude over to feedback surveys. When we look at the surface level, the development life of a survey is straightforward. But the reality is that there's a whole world of things that are going on and some agony between steps A and B. And if I'm being honest, it's a huge amount of work. It is a tremendous amount of work, but it's absolutely worth it. You get valid, beautiful, interpretable data. When I deploy a survey, I'm really excited for the results. I don't close my eyes, click the mouse, and say, hold on to your butts, right? So when we deploy surveys digitally, we're dealing with concurrent objectives and constraints that require robust quality control measures, engaging recruitment procedures, and non-invasive targeting the population of interest. And we need to defend against reward-hungry trolls. So lucky for you, I've boiled this down to 3 feasible steps, okay? So to set the stage, we're gonna go to an obvious place. Jurassic Park universe. Yeah, you thought you were here for survey design. It's gotta be fun for me too, okay? So, even if you don't know anything about the story, an eccentric billionaire invites a team of experts to come to the mysterious island of Isla Nublar to look at his brand new theme park that has living, breathing dinosaurs. But his IT guy with gambling problems shuts down the power of the park so that he can deliver dinosaur embryos to a rival company. The dinosaurs break free, the survivors try to turn the power back on, and the day is saved by a Unix system. Repeat that template 4 times. The point is that this eccentric billionaire did do his due diligence. He did bring in a panel of experts. He brought a paleontologist, he brought a chaos theory mathematician, he brought a lawyer, and he brought his grandchildren. It was really forward thinking. And what I want to introduce the idea to you is that when people are asked to give feedback, everyone comes with their different subjective experiences, expertise, and their feelings, either collected over time or how they're feeling that moment. And so when you're deploying a survey, you need to accept that you cannot make everyone happy, and that without feedback, without guidance for asking for feedback, you are going to end up just as frustrated as the participants in your survey. So our question today is, how do we discover preferences, and how do we determine what is important to our participants in a sea of opinions, and in that sea of opinions, how can we extract what is actionable insight? But we're in the era of big data, where data is the new gold, is new oil, right? And feedback surveys are often built with this combative idea of how do we wrangle the most amount of information for the least amount of time and for the least amount of money. And these kind of approaches, quite frankly, lead to garbage in and garbage out report. Bad collection, bad reporting. So if we go back to our theme, it doesn't really matter how much security and biodata in the world, it can't stop life from finding a way and breaking chaos again. So if you go through the effort of collecting all this information but can't do anything with it, time is wasted. So we're going to talk about how to avoid that. So here's what you came for. Take home points right away. The way that we're developing effective surveys is you work backwards. What you're trying to say is, you're thinking, what is your outcome? Who is your popular interest, and why do they need it? Then you'll arrive at an effective approach of what kind of questions you want to ask. You want to be mobile friendly, right? How do you develop something that is friendly for this tiny little screen? This will make it concise, this will make it quick to do, and it will influence completion rates. And we'll go into the rigors of user testing. The most important thing is that, if I can leave you with anything, get out of the bubble when you are developing your surveys. What is important to you may not be as important to your audience, and you're going to need to do rigorous testing to make sure that everyone is on the same page. But above all, if you put those 3 steps aside, I want to just think about the win-win condition, the golden rule, right? The idea is that if you're moving away from the garbage in and garbage out approach, if you create a survey that's engaging to others, they will provide accurate and interesting feedback to you that is usable. But to arrive at this point with this Zen mantra of survey unto others as a survey unto others, it takes practice. So we're going to go through that. Why would we use surveys in the first place? They allow you to capture really interesting behavioral information from your population interest. And time again, what your stakeholders want versus what you think the stakeholders want can be wildly different. So, for example, Apple thinks we want AirPods and no headphone jack, while most of us just want freaking better battery life. But we can go through these kind of effort of sending out these surveys to get kind of feedback, and what happens? Crickets, right? You know, you can offer gift cards, you can threaten people to finish your survey, and you can plead with them, but you get these kind of low response rates. And we're in a world of where survey fatigue is a major obstacle to collecting information on opinions and experiences. But then we can also have the complete opposite problem, where you got a digitally deployed survey and you've got a really fired up audience. Now, question for you all. Who knows what this boat is? Does anyone know this boat's name? Yeah! This is the famous boat, Boaty McBoatface, the most famous boat on the internet. The internet aggregate site Reddit got a hold of a of a survey from the National Environment Research Council that had a campaign to name this boat, and they voted all the way to the top, Boaty McBoatface. Right, very exciting. So this is where we got an audience with an opposite of intent what we want, or we've got distracted audiences. We do need to prepare for that in some level, maybe not Reddit level, but prepare for that on some level when we deploy our surveys digitally. The reason all this matters is because there is a huge cavern, there's a huge gap between what is an agreeable idea amongst your audience versus an adoptable idea that the business can act on. A really good example of this is my Starbucks idea, where they said, send us everything that you're thinking of. And the audience really loved the idea of the fancy new drinks. But what they were actually looking for, the business itself wanted information about maybe better payment options. So without good design and guiding your audience as the kind of things that you're looking for, then without those kind of measures in place, you won't have the kind of actual insight that you actually need. So we start with the 4 W's, right? Your first question is, who are these survey questions for? How is this information, where is this information going to be distributed to? Is it going to be to other employees? Is it going to be stakeholders? Is it your clients? Then you're thinking, how are we going to use this information? And what are we actually interested in? And why? Then we'll wait to the last piece, the who cares. You have to be able to answer this question without using any of the words in the other ones that you answer for the other statements. Who cares? Put yourself in the participant's shoes. Why should they care? Why should they engage in this questionnaire? Think about from their perspective so that you can get the best results. The reason this matters is because it's more than just receiving, more than just external motivation. I bet you weren't expecting the psychology lesson out here. But when we think of external motivation, it's like praise or fame or money. But studies have shown that when we're digitally deployed surveys, people want the intrinsic reward. They want something that is personally rewarding to them. That is why we have most successful surveys that are interesting to our audience. So after you've addressed the four W's of survey design, this is where you are working backwards, and you're ready to move to writing your items. So putting it all together, this is the full life of when you're putting together your feedback survey. And you can feel free to take a picture of this slide if you would like. Now, we've talked about what the outcome is like, and now we'll focus on how to write the individual items for your survey. And here's the main point. How many of you have seen this quote before? Right? It's been attributed to everyone from Mark Twain to Woodrow Wilson and probably Einstein in there somewhere, but it's by this mathematician, Pascal. And the idea is we want to just write brief, concrete survey items. And it follows, so the one helpful area is called using the BRUSO acronym. So to see this in action, I really like this example from Grubhub. They wanted their audience to tag photos of the food items that were available on their application. And so they used brief instructions for their participants and provided images to give an example of what they exactly wanted. So it's very straightforward for anyone coming fresh to their survey task to just participate and give them the accurate kind of information that they were looking for. So when we start writing our survey, the simple rule is just talk like a human, right? That's how you build rapport digitally, and that's how you make the questions interesting. So the conversational tone of the questions you're writing and being aware of average writing ability and not using any technical jargon will make the survey approachable. This next part is we're talking about the order of these questions. So when we think about the order of the items, the idea is to maintain participant focus. So you want people to be efficient, and you want people to be accurate, right? And above all, it's supposed to be fun. This last point about the sensitive questions is particularly salient because you need to decide if collecting demographics is really, truly relevant, all right? Like asking intrusive questions like income or gender or age, and don't assume that respondents will trust your privacy practices, right? So if demographic collection is really, truly necessary as part of your survey, consider asking for demographics at the very, very end. And here's why. Like studies have shown that participants respond differently after being asked for demographic information, right? So these kind of sensitive questions can affect the survey outcomes by decreasing the number of participants who are willing to take your survey, and there's decreased response rates to maybe certain items, right? I'm not gonna give my tax information just to get a $5 survey, $5 Starbucks gift card. And it can decrease the accuracy of the responses. So now I advocate for multi-choice questions and just one write-in question. So it allows participants to write in something that might be, write in about their own significant experiences. And if you have more than one write-in question, then that's a whole mixed bag of information they don't want to deal with. So some of you savvy people are thinking, okay, great. It's just this numeric, 5-point scale, multi-choice question. So does anyone know what this kind of scale is called? Yeah, Likert, yes. So there's something really important to remember when you're building this kind of Likert scale, is that you want to put your response categories in the most concrete language possible. So if you have strongly agree at the very tail end, maybe people would be more responsive if they had something like awesome or loved it, or something more concrete for the strongly disagree. But above all that, there's a danger to using these kind of Likert scales. The idea is that there's positive response tendency. So when I'm talking about acquiescence bias, this is where you're seeing, if you're getting feedback where there's a low response rate for your surveys, and then everyone is pretty much responding positively, and then in the open-ended feedback section, people have all sorts of commentary that's all over the map and mostly negative, this might be part of that story. This is where, when you have these kind of 5-point, 7-point numeric scales, there's so many ties, it's just skewed towards that end, and it's difficult to interpret. So I'm going to go through how I've used these question types, and I'm going to show when these question types use useful insight, when they don't. Pardon me. I'm going to show when they don't produce useful insight, and then I'm going to show when these question types do produce really interesting outcomes that get noticed, and they spark change. So here, this was a study I did on looking at antibiotic overuse and understanding misconceptions and beliefs about antibiotic resistance in the American public. And this is one of the questions we asked them, which of the following symptoms are most appropriately treated by antibiotics? And we put this on this 5-point scale. And this is a selection of some of the symptoms. So, for example, with ear pain, how many think that the antibiotic use for ear pain would be very inappropriate? Inappropriate? How many think would be very appropriate? All the way to the end. And so, what we did is we produced this this graphic. And you're looking from one end of the scale, one end of the graphic to the other. The green shades indicate that is very appropriate, and those are the kind of responses that people gave back. Going all the way to the more red parts of the scale that was the audience interpreted as less appropriate use of antibiotics. With this slide, though, we're not learning anything particularly relevant or exciting. because people, for the most part, are responding the way we would hope to, and they're responding to correct use about antibiotics or not. But here's a better approach to understand what the public thinks about antibiotic. And so what we did is we assessed 5 concepts, right? We had 5 concepts and only 3 to 5 questions each. So the major concepts, we want to look at the major dimensions of each concept. So I'm going to just show a selection here with antibiotic resistance. And we looked at several different areas. And what this showed is we found that although the majority of people that responded to our survey agreed that inappropriate use of antibiotics led to development of resistant bacteria, on the other hand, only very few agreed that antibiotic resistance was a significant problem. So when we have multiple questions on the same concept, right, then we can make an interpretation with the idea among the American public that antibiotic resistance, that the American public do not perceive that they have a role to influence antibiotic resistance amongst themselves or in the general community. And when you tie that with an open-ended question, you can learn something even more exciting. So in our free response question, we told participants, tell us in your own words, define for us, what is antibiotic resistance, right? You can answer survey questions all you want, but tell us what you think it is. And we discovered we discovered major themes that came from people's free responses. And the most important one was the idea that the body becomes immune. And that is the body becomes immune, which is not the most appropriate interpretation of how antibiotics function in the body. And so we can communicate that information to the clinicians and part of the conversation what they have in their well visits with their patients. It's far more interesting than how people respond on a Likert scale. Switching gears from antibiotics to breast cancer research, we wanted to understand how people perceive the lethality of ovarian cancer. So ovarian cancer is known as the silent killer because people don't show specific symptoms at early stages, and like 63% of people that are diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the late stage, where only maybe 25, 26% survive after 5 years. So we chose, in this case, breast cancer as our control group, right? When we think of control group, it's our benchmark. And we want to assess knowledge of breast cancer compared to ovarian cancer amongst the general public, since the breast cancer is the most commonly diagnosed disease amongst most commonly diagnosed cancer amongst women. So here we have breast cancer is pink, and ovarian cancer is teal, and we have it on our Likert scale and we have it on our 5-point Likert scale comparing how men versus women in terms of their perceived knowledge of these 2 cancers. But where we can get more interesting with the kind of question types we're asking is we did a repeated measures section, right? So what's happening on this slide is that we had 4 questions, and we asked participants on 2 occasions, tell us what you think what the lifetime risk of breast cancer and ovarian cancer is. So each time we presented this lifetime risk question, we would permutate the answer choices. So for breast cancer, can anyone guess what the lifetime breast cancer risk is? Anyone guess? Shout it out. You said 70? 70? It is, so the answer for breast cancer is 1 in 8. I know. But then we asked the same question, again, permutating and randomizing the order of responses for ovarian cancer. And here we said, when we presented this information to our participants, we said to them, give your honest feedback, like give your gut response. There's no penalty for being wrong, and you will receive the incentive, you'll receive the monetary incentive no matter how you respond. So because we did a repeated measures quality control element for our survey, we're able to conduct something called correspondence analysis. So bird's eye view, this is a statistical technique for just summarizing tables, right? Some people call them crosstab tables of categorical data, also known as contingency tables. So this is a plot of the rows and columns of the contingency table, and it visualizes the interesting relationships plotted onto a 2D space. I'm going to walk you through what this means. So the responses for, let's see, so the raw data points in the middle don't have any relationship to each other, so we don't consider them. But what we are interested is how people responded to diagnostic risk for breast cancer. What this shows is that people responded similarly each time they saw that question, even though the responses were permutated. But when it comes to ovarian cancer, people were just guessing left and right. Their responses were all over the map. And this allows us to directly quantify what is the knowledge gap from breast cancer to ovarian cancer. So this teaches us that there's much more engaging kind of questions we can ask when we develop these kind of surveys. Asking about preferences and asking about misconceptions will give you much more interesting kind of feedback.
Do you have time for a question for the slide?
Sure.
So yes, for the antibiotic survey, what was the intrinsic reward for the user to encourage them to go through with it?
They were rewarded. This was conducted on, this was conducted on Amazon Mechanical Turk. Oh, but the intrinsic reward, not the extrinsic reward. The intrinsic reward was that we did report back to everyone what the survey results were, and we also did a summary when they completed the survey about how important antibiotics are and about the antibiotic resistance crisis. So they were learning a little bit as part of it. So now that we've gone into our items, we're going to the last part about mode, survey mode. When we're deploying our survey, the way it looks on our screen, on our big browser screen, is wildly different than how it looks on a cell phone. And most of your people that you're going to deploying surveys to is going to be on a phone, right? So, when you're putting together these kind of surveys, the less scrolling you have vertically or horizontally, my goodness, the better off you're going to be. It forces you to be concise, okay? And it forces you to be brief. And most importantly, when you design mostly for mobile, it prioritizes inclusive design. That means you can design approaches that are better for people that may have poor eyesight. It still goes, I know. It just goes. It takes a full minute. It goes and goes. Less scrolling, happier everyone is. So in general, you're limiting the amount of questions you have, and you're forcing yourself to use 10 or few questions. The most important thing to focus, though, is you want to reduce the amount of time it takes someone to think about your question and give their best answer, so they don't have to have too many items in their head. But the question is, how do we address these last two points? How do we know how long it takes someone to think about a question and then answer it? And that's where we come into the last part of usability testing. So how did others understand your intent and your meaning, and how is that translated to your audience in question? And so we want to start with an explicit objective presented to that person. This is what we're about. This is what we want to get out of you, right? You're setting out the welcome mat right out there. When you're checking for the kind of questions that you're putting out there, you're going to ask people that are testing it, your beta testers, about face validity, meaning it's a kind of a subjective idea of whether or not it measures what's supposed to measure. Is it measuring what it's claimed to? And construct validity. You're going into the extent that your question captures your trait of interest, and reliability. Is every time that you send out this question, does it elicit the kind of information that you were hoping for? Are people on the same page as you? And this relates to the idea of shared mental models, right? You want everyone to be on the same page. That's why we do these kind of usability testing. So some of you may have heard the story of the of the 5 blind men who had never seen an elephant before, and they conceptualized their elephant by touching different parts of the animal, and they described it based on their limited experience, but naturally their experiences were wildly different from each other. This is why we do user testing. This is why we try to achieve a shared mental model, so that we can understand, we can know that our question wording and our intent is understood by everyone else. So when you're conducting your usability testing, have everyone critique the logical flow of the questions, and can they interface with the software that's deploying this survey as well. And you want to look for unusual patterns of responses. This is known as non-differentiation, right? This is where people might get bored. This is where people just want to get through it, and they may do something called straight lining, where they're just responding one direction, one pattern, all the way down your slide, all the way down your survey. The last point is probably the best advice I can possibly give you for having an awesome, kick-ass survey. And in the field, they just call it invite a sensitive person to look over your survey. But I say find the most persnickety person you possibly can to do a stress test and give you feedback about your survey before you deploy to the crowd. You want someone that does not care about the success of your survey, they just want to be right. And that is the kind of person that will give you the best survey you've ever seen in your life. So as we conclude this talk, we're talking about how do we keep out trolls. So as you're preparing your short, brief survey, do anticipate that you will get, as we talked about, non-differentiation, we'll get maybe some straight lining, and just be prepared to have a hard and fast rule when you're analyzing your survey results. If people are responding in such an unusual pattern, then you can take those out. The best way is usually assess how long it takes someone to complete the survey. You can see if most adults, it takes around, most adults read around 200 to 250 words per minute. So see how long it takes to read through your survey, and if people are just responding and finishing the survey in less time than that, then you know that they're probably not paying attention. This last point, when I talk about survey design and survey deployment, I've heard many times that people come up with a very complicated plan to defend their survey against intruders. And what I recommend, and what studies have shown, is that if you have a simple 2-step process, you can target your population that you want without having to do backflips to keep people out. So the idea is that in the 2-step process, first, you invite everybody. You invite everybody of your population that you want to target to participate in your survey, so that they have no incentive to lie. Then people that responded to the survey item that was of interest to you, then you can go back to them and invite them again for a second survey. So that way you know you've accurately targeted the population of interest that you want, and that they are not trying to subvert your criteria of interest. So when you're recruiting and when you are engaging your population, you want to make sure that you're upfront with what you're trying to do. You want to make sure that it looks attractive, that you have a good white space to text ratio. And if anyone responds negatively to your survey, be sure to follow up with them right away, and with a human being on the other side, and not use boilerplate language. That'll keep people from going to Twitter to voice their opinions. And then if you do get a positive feedback, be sure to shout that out and amplify that voice right away. That way everyone wins. So in summary, when you're thinking about the grand scheme of things, you're working from who are the people that we want to target, and who is this information going to be sent for, and that will lend well to the kind of items you write and the kind of questions that you write. And then when you lead to execution, that will take the longest amount of time to get the usability part down and reduce the amount of working memory load that you have on your participants. Thank you. Is there any questions? Yeah.
So I just posted some slides, so you can ignore it. It's a little bit too elaborate, but pretty much, can you suggest me resources that could help somebody come up with strategies like you came up with for determining whether or not people knew more about ovarian cancer compared to breast cancer?
Whether or not they knew.
The strategy you came up with was to determine, to find out if they're guessing.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's something that we would just think of.
And it was, let's see. So there are textbooks that in social science research that do go into writing surveys, but I think it did stem from our experiences of wanting to avoid straight lining or non-differentiation patterns. So what I'm trying to say is that if you have the option, I don't know, in your questions and you're providing a monetary incentive at the end to complete the survey, what's to stop people from just straight lining and I don't know? So that is a part of our brainstorming session. That's how we came up with the idea of what if we were upfront with people of like, you don't need to guess, you're not going to be penalized, and be honest and you'll be rewarded. So, and unfortunately that comes with experience. So maybe the thing I can say to you is that the golden rule really does allow for you to be creative. Thinking about the golden rule allows you to be creative with surveys. Any other questions? Any other? Okay. All right, thank you.